So a little bit of background today on Apex for those who haven't had a chance to use the toolkit much yet. It's actually been developing CoachView toolkits since before CoachViews have even existed. Back in the days of Teamworks and Lombardi, what you could do is use an XML transform, and the IBM, what is now IBM BPM product, only lets you drag in a certain 10 different coaches, which are now called coach views, and then you'd have to transform them into whatever you wanted. So we added things where you could use customization options in the HTML attributes to make things a little bit different. So you drag in a table, you add a few attributes, and that table could become a nice dojo grid, or it would become a lazy loading tree grid. So with respect to that, I'd say this would be, considering that as our first version of the CoachView toolkit before CoachViews existed, this would be our third version. We call it Apex CoachViews 2, since that is the official, since the release of CoachViews, our second toolkit, and we harness the power of Bootstrap and Angular to provide a great mobile experience and some more flavorful UIs. That being said, this is what's new in 1.4. And to highlight that, what we do is we create this examples app. As when we release a version of the toolkit, we also release an examples app. And that examples app contains, as I funnel through my different designers here, this is the server with our examples app. Best way to see the what's new pages, and it's available to anyone who downloads the examples for free. You can jump right in this Apex CoachView Start Here service. You give that a run, and you land here. And as you see, some beautiful faces of Apex employees. And not only will this contain links to different training and reference pages, it also highlights our what's new. So as we're back in our what's new tab, actually before I start going into the what's new, I'd like to throw out a reminder, this will be recorded. I'm not sure if we're recording yet, but if we haven't been, we should probably start now.
We are recording. We've been recording for a while.
Thanks, Erica. Good thing no one else is talking and embarrassed themselves too much while we were recording and didn't tell them. So a couple of the main things we introduced in 1.4 is 8.5.6 support. One big thing with our CoachView toolkits is we like to support every version. So from 8 to 8.5.6, we have supported all versions, and the toolkit is the same for every version across, except 8.5.5 and 8.5.6 will have the what you see is what you get designer. It wasn't a huge deal to implement from 8.5.5 to 8.5.6. Main things were they changed the dojo version, so I just had a couple fixes there. To show those who haven't had a chance to play around with the toolkit in 8.5.6, I'll just open up a quick client-side designer, quick demo page, drag in some coach views here, just to show you what you're going to get. Actually, I figure it's actually better to introduce some of the style features before I go into that so you know what you're looking for. We had a nice style overhaul in 1.4 previously. You came in and had to do mostly your own CSS to make things look pretty. But with the new style features in 1.4, what we've done is add themes to every element instead of just buttons. Buttons, we allowed you to use the Bootstrap themes, primary, success, warning, and to add different colors and flavors to your app. Now with the style overhaul, that extends to the rows, column headers, dialogues, navigation bars, tabs, all those fun things. Added some input groups as another part of our style overhaul, and also added some things to buttons which are included in the style. So look out for those things as we go into the what you see is what you get designer. I'm going to highlight this now because my demo built live. Call me old-fashioned, but I'll be doing it in the regular process designer. So for any of our implementations, we drag in our page view. This gives us some default options to put on every single coach, and it helps us run things using Angular. So I just threw in a container which helps manage the sizing of the page. I'll drag in a row, and as you can see, it's popping in there. We have a heading level configuration option, generally 1 through 6, but also offers some customization. So if I change that to 3 because 1 was too large, it'll show up right here in our designer. As I mentioned, we have the themes. So now we're changing the headers on my row. Primary is blue, success by default is green, info is another type of blue. So we'll go back to primary, kind of like that. And that's another new option on row and column. So we'll try column here, jump into configuration options. Heading level, we want it to be slightly smaller than that. Our row, we'll do danger as our theme. We'll even make it a panel. As you can see, nice styling for a panel here. And we have a responsive width configuration option, which also will be showing up in your client-side designer based on the bootstrap sizing. So for example, if I did 12, 6, and 4, what I would expect is that for the smallest type screen, I will extend the entire 12 columns. Smaller screen, I'll get 6, and for a medium screen, I'll get 6. Largest type screen will be taking up 1/3 of the room because we're 4 out of 12. So I click off of that, should implement. Whether I do the designer here, I'm clicking the icons on the upper right to change the sizing of the designer, which 856 allows you to do all these fun things like setting config options based on screen size. We try to avoid doing that. As we said, we support 8 and 856. That's just to show you what's happening. I think it'd even work if we just shrunk the screen. No, they got it locked in there. And we just throw different views in here. See our help text, our labels update. So it really gives you that true what you see is what you get feeling on 856. We did a little bit of work in 1.4 to bring it up from 1.3. Not all of our views work seamlessly in the client-side designer. Now they should function a little bit better for you here. Moving back to our what's new in 1.4. As you noticed, all our pretty colors, not every app wants to be these particular green, blues, grays, and yellows. You might want to customize your colors. And the way we implemented that is by adding to the toolkit itself a color schemer. If I can get to the right designer here. So now I'm in the examples app. So you won't find it in here. Don't need to be looking in here. It'll be in the ACV2, Apex Coach Fuse 2 toolkit down here. So as I funnel through, get down to my human services, we see we have color schemer here. All we have to do is give that a run. And we have a beautifully colorful screen here. So one thing it does right at the top is give you a link to the actual Bootstrap site. If you want to do a full in-depth theming of Bootstrap, we support that, but you'd have to go out to the site to do that. What we have here is an interactive theme designer just to help you get your colors straight. And it also gives you the CSS to add to your page. And I'll show you that at the bottom in a second. So as you see, very colorful, and we also have these nice color pickers to help you choose how you'd want your page to display. For example, I would want, maybe I want a darker blue here. So as I click and go through, it's updating the style for me automatically on the page. And so if I say, all right, instead of the blue in the background, I want my text to be blue, white background, I click default. As you can see, it does all the darkening and lightening for you. So it updates the mouse overs and the clicks for you. If we went to a grayish blue, we now have all that updated. We update our text color. That's not particularly pretty, but we get the point. If we did success coloring, which is generally green, maybe we want this to be a little bit lighter. and our text color to be a darker green here. We could do that, and as I click through my nav bar, maybe I want my nav bar to be the success color. I can do that as well, and it shows that up. So as we've been changing things on this page, it'll also give us the output CSS down here. So we changed the primary and we changed success. So what we would do is take, if we only change primary, we just take this, plop it in our CSS. Might look like a lot, but it's really when you have to do the buttons, the headers, nav bars, tabs, dialogues, you know, it gets a lot. So it's pretty simplified, but has to cover a lot of complex things. So if we just had success and primary, we changed those two colors, we'd select that, paste it into a coach view or a header that went on every page, and that's how we would go ahead and use these themes. Real quick, real simple. It would take you, what, 5 minutes to go ahead and implement a new complete color scheme for your app. Does anyone have any questions on the theming and color schemes I've just went over? All right, hopping back to the what's new page here. As we just demonstrated, we showed off the color picker, kind of showed off our input groups, but may as well go investigate what else we can do with our input group. So if I jump in to the reference page, I open up group. Input group stems from our group view. It's actually implemented as a configuration option on the group view. We notice up here we have our regular groupings, just adding any views to a group. Down here we selected the input group option. So it lets you add text before or after and any of the input fields, not just text, whether it be dates, a select, a lookup. You can add it on any of your fields. And also you can throw in buttons, right or left side, and checkboxes to your input groups. And for example, the checkbox gives you the ability to say, let's say this field was read-only unless it was checked. This would give you a real convenient way to do that kind of user interface. With all of these things in the example app, you will be able to check out how they're implemented because they're all done using ACV2. So I open up that group page we were reviewing from the reference selection, and down here we have our input groups. So let me give you a look at the configuration options on an input group. We've added a couple down here. You'll see the type of a group starts as default, but we select input anytime we want to do an input group. In an input group, simply add one input field and that's it. And then as many buttons as you want, as many checkboxes as you want. Don't suggest more than one, but if you're feeling frisky, go for it. And then for things, just the text or the icons, what we do is add directly on group as you can put in configuration options. So you need to specify text or an icon, and icon can be an image, it can be a glyph icon from Bootstrap themes, and recently implemented, you are now allowed to use Font Awesome, so thank you for the recommendation on that to some of our users. You get to set your theme, make sure it's colorful, and say whether you want it on the right or the left. So as we see, this one just had one implementation of text on the left. The second one had two icons, or one text and one icon, one on the left, one on the right. So if I take a look at that, we see that just adding on the left, we get our text, that $, it's green because we put it as success. Put it on the left side, used our second read-only icon here, used the glyph icon for save, which gave us that pretty icon, set it to the theme to info, gave us that nice light blue. And that's your basic power behind the input groups. One more thing is the way we implemented it like this, rather than just being able to specify buttons here on the group itself or on the input, the way we implemented it like this is because we wanted to offer you the fully featured button. Rather than just saying, oh, you want a button here, here you have a fake button. Now you can drag a button into an input group and still have all of your options available to you with the assign to and from power, the show and spinner, resetting the scope, list items, which you may or may not use in a group, and I will show you an example of that a little bit later. So real powerful implementation of input groups. Let me jump back to what's new. Show you what else is new. We had some enhancements to lookup. Notably, this is requested by a number of people, just a paginated view of the options. Lookup is just a drop-down view, and now you can say, I only want to see 8 options at a time, and I'll click to go through all of them for long lists of options. And button enhancements I just showed you made it a little bit easier, add some functionality directly to the button, because previously you had to bind a Boolean to the button and bind a Boolean to, say, a reset scope and bind a Boolean to the list item action. And kind of just put some of those inside the button itself to save you time in development. Another big enhancement is the repeater view. Repeater came out of the need to have repeating tabs, but instead of just implementing repeating tabs, we made it a generic repeater view. Now with Apex Coach Views 2, you'll notice that column and row and those types of views, those are already dynamic and you can bind lists to them. But repeater gives you that additional option to not only do tabs, which is my favorite use for it, but just about anything, you put it in and now you can repeat it. So I'll show you that in the reference pages for repeater view in behavior here, or wherever we put it, I don't remember. There it is, it's in the layout. So this example is a repeater for the tabs as well as a repeater for a button section. And the implementation is to be able to add to the list using this form below, and it'll show up as a new tab, and that these buttons will allow you to select the different tabs. So if I wanted to add a tab with new tab label, and then maybe a 5th tab on there, I add those, and my buttons let me select those dynamic tabs. I'll jump over into the process designer for that. Remember, in the examples app, all of these things are available to take a look at how we've implemented them and take a look at the different configuration options for some best practice ideas. So with our tabs view, in general, you just drag a tab in one at a time. Instead, if you want repeating tabs, you would drag a repeater directly in place of where you'd put a tab. So normally, if we were dragging a tab and placing it into this coach, we drag it there. Instead, we would drag the repeater right inside and then a tab directly inside the repeater. So let me delete these real quick. Now the repeater is bound to our list, and that's our only option. All it does is say, take whatever I have inside and make more of them. So now looking at the tab itself, you can bind to that list name, and that's what we were doing. That was a name value pair. We bound is selected to the toggle select of a Boolean in our list, and our text is just bound to a string within the list. Because we bound, I'm clicking over to the button within this other repeater, because we bound toggle select to a Boolean to show the different tab, just clicking on the repeating button will select that particular tab. Real quick and easy, you don't have to click on the tab. Could be used to select the next tab, any of that sort of thing. And then adding a new tab was as simple as using our list action coach views. It says add an item to the end, use this new item that we're creating here, and then set the Boolean back to false because it is triggered by a Boolean. and the button sets it to true. We want to be able to do it multiple times, so we automatically set it back to false and add it to the list. Any questions currently on repeater and how repeater is implemented? All right, then we'll move on along to the best part of the demo. And the What's New session is the live build, where you can watch me try to build something and hopefully not mess up too bad. So I'm jumping into an app. I'm going to do this one on 8.5 because I like designing in the traditional process designer, and to show you that it works on everything. We've seen the examples app was running in 8.0. We're now running in 8.5. We also saw that what you see is what you get in 8.56. So my idea for this demo was to create a kind of feedback type thing or a blog entry type service where all you need to do is create a rich text editor and for your entry, and then each entry has tags. And what we've seen a lot of people have questions about is multi-selects and adding things like tagging different items with a list of tags, being able to add custom tags rather than just the ones available to you in a list. And that is going to highlight some of the new features we've added to button, to look up, to input groups, and we'll even theme it a little bit so you can see some of that fun stuff. So to get started, I'll actually just call this feedback. Our goal for this feedback is to be able to put it on every coach. So maybe you've made a new app and you want to let your testers or just users in general give feedback on any given page they're on, whether it be that use case or another. We want to be able to have this on every page. So we'll make a new coach view, and we'll start adding things to our layout here. We are going to start with a column. What we're going to do is have a collapsible column to start. So we'll say this will be primary, make it that cool blue color. We'll make it a panel. We'll have it start collapsed. This is going on every page. We don't want it to be taking up too much room, so we'll leave it collapsed. Heading level, we'll try 3. Responsive width, so we'll say it'll take up the whole page if we're on a small screen. Otherwise, we'll go with 8 on a medium screen, and then 6 on a big screen. We'll throw in a row to help us keep things in order here because we want to have a rich text next to a column. So rich text will essentially just be our content of our feedback here. We'll set a height on our rich text editor so it's not too big, probably 200 pixels is about right. Responsive width, we're going to have our blog on the left, or our rich text on the left, and then our tag system on the right. So what we want to do is, if we're really small, we don't have room for both of those. So on a small screen, we'll make it 12. On any other screen size, we'll go with 8 and let the tags take up the other third of the screen. So this column over here is going to be our tags. So essentially, we need to take up the rest of that screen. 12 on small, we have 4 left out of the 12 with the rich text taking up 8. Go ahead and do that. We don't want to show the label, so just to get rid of it and just make it disappear, we can do that. Same with this row up here. We didn't really need that. Anytime I have a row or a column when I know the label's not showing, and I know I don't really need to use it to organize anything, I just wipe out the label so it gets out of the way, leaves me a little bit more room on the page. So what we're going to do is use a little bit of an input group here, implementation in our column. We want an input group. I'm just going to drag on some other views real quick so I don't have to jump around this thing too much. we wanted to use a lookup to select our tags. And we also, let me get some buttons on here. We need an add button for tags. We'll throw in a create button at the bottom. We knew that primary was that green, or success was that green color. We'll go ahead and use that. We'll just call it create. So now to implement this lookup, we need some options. Where are we going to get our options? Well, we want to use our private variable pattern is really powerful for these modular reusable coach views. I don't want to have to use any boundary events to get data. I don't want to use a boundary event to add things, because this is going to go on every coach across my application. I don't want to have to worry about any of that and connecting wires to every single coach. I want it contained within this coach view, but I also don't really want to have to write any code for it. I just want to be able to use coach views to do it. So what we're going to be able to do is add a private variable for feedback. And this complex variable is going to contain all the different variables we use inside this modular coach. So for example, I said we're going to be able to list tags. We need to get that. Let's use name value pair. The name will be something like error or development or suggestion, something like that. And the value will just be maybe a unique key in the database so that as the name changes, we don't mess up anything. We need the tags affiliated with this particular blog post or this particular feedback. Sorry, I keep using blog post and feedback interchangeably, but about the same thing. We need the text for our feedback. Now we also need some triggers. We need to, as I mentioned, we have an add button to add the tag, so we're going to have to say maybe add tag clicked. That's going to be a Boolean. And I think this might be enough to get through our basic things. If we're going to be adding something to the list, because we want this to work on all versions, I just use selected tag here and make that a name value pair. Rather than using list selected, which is fidgety on some versions of IBM BPM, we'll just use selected tag. So now to put these into our coach here, we can go ahead and just bind. So I need to add it to this coach view first of all. I'll just call it PV, make it a type, PV feedback. So now I can start putting all these assignments on there. Lookup, for example, we need our options to be a list of tags, which we'll get from a service. We're going to use a selected object for that tag, and this will tell us which one we have selected, so we know which one to add to our repeater down here of my tags, this particular blog post. We want a drop-down button to be able to select options without typing ahead. This might take up too much space on a page, so instead of letting all the options come in, you could have any big number of tags. We use that options per page. That's the paginated drop-down I showed you a second ago. And for now, we'll validate our entries. The button itself, I'd rather use an icon than the label. I'm going to hide the label, use the plus. I'll just put this in here so I know what it is. This is going to be part of an input group, but we do want it to look pretty, so we'll make it success and we'll use green. We want to bind it to our add tag clicked here. And then we'll use a list action. We're going to trigger that on button click. Our new item is going to be that selected tag from the lookup. The list we want to add it to is my tags. We'll add it to the end of the list, and we'll set the Boolean back to false because we want to be able to do more with this list. So now we've been able to add something to the list for my tags. We need to be able to display it, and if we made a mistake, we want to be able to remove it. So to this repeater, I want to show the tags that I have already. We'll bind the repeater itself to my tags. Inside this group, We'll want to show some text for the tag we have. This will be an output text, read only. Bind that to the name of the tag. And then we'll use a button here to remove it. And this button, we'll just call it remove. It'll be ugly. For now, we'll let that label show. There's a glyph icon for remove. That's an X. We'll use that to make it look nice. And we use danger because that's red and somewhat synonymous with removing things. Make it smaller than usual because it needs to line up with this text a little bit better. And then what we want it to do, we want it to remove this item from the list. Formerly, you'd have to drag in to this type of scenario. You'd have to drag in a list item action, bind a Boolean to it, bind that Boolean to the button, kind of add those to your private variables. We don't want to do that, so we can just do this and say, remove the item when we click this button. Well, that's convenient, saves us a lot of time there. So we have that set up, should remove our item. The text is bound to the current item and it's read only. This group, just a regular group. And we have a repeater bound to my tags. Once again, we're adding things to this list action. With this plus, we notice that we'll be able to add that item to the entire list using a list action. One thing we also might want to try to do, another power added to button, is this reset scope. And that should take anything in this, whatever section it's in, and reset it. So it'll probably reset our selected tag for us as we add it to our list. That would be convenient. All right, we have selected tag coming here. We have our PV tags. So the question is, where are we going to get these tags from without binding any variables on here? We have a coach view called list objects. It's based on a service call pattern we use for AJAX services. It lets you take any AJAX service with any amount of inputs, any amount of outputs, and simply make a coach view for it, or any coach view that follows that pattern, or any service that follows that pattern, and then plop it on a coach and be able to bind and use it. So this is just an example of that pattern, but it comes with the toolkit because it's one that you'd use in a lot of circumstances. So I need to get a list of tags. One thing I cheated on this demo is my tag service. I made that because no one really wants me to show you building a list tag service. But you'll see it's bound to ID, name, and objects. Those are the same variables on that coach view. All I'm doing here, real simple, listing 20 tags. No creative names, anything like that. Just getting a list of tags. Anything within our service call pattern gives you this execute on option. For now, we'll do it on load. We'll see in a second when I take this to the next level what it's like when we do a more complex implementation and then we start adding tags and changing tags. But for now, we'll just use this set group of tags and we'll see if any of this that I just made works, which could be intense. So we'll cross our fingers and hope that all this that I've been working on for the last 15, 20 minutes just runs nicely. So we'll just create a test feedback. Hook this up. We're just going to add a page to our view here. Page container, and then our feedback. Oh, container first. And to implement something with the private variables pattern, we know we don't have to bind anything here. This is just a random coach we're dragging this into. We don't want to bind anything, but to kind of initialize it, some versions have an initialize checkbox. What we do to initialize the list is just click open all these different objects, and now we're set to go. that tells IBM BPM that we are using them rather than not using them. So we've got this collapsible feedback panel. Looks like I didn't set my input group to be an input group and made it a regular group instead. But we get our content here, our lookup, get some options. Let's see if this works. Oh, we forgot to hide the label there. But as we can see, we click this, we add it to the list, it resets the form, and remove here should be able to take this tag off the list. Well, that's mighty convenient. It's a little scrunched right now, so we'll see what it looks like in a little bit bigger. Maybe I'll make this 8 instead of 6, which is probably a good idea. So let me just jump back in there. I don't want that to be 6. I'd rather have it be 8, just a large screen. Otherwise, take up the whole thing. It'll look a little bit scrunched there. We're not cramped for space. It's just a collapsible thing. And what else do we want to do on here? We had extra labels showing that we didn't want it. The text was showing a label. We didn't want that. This group over here, I forgot to specify as an input group. That's an important thing. So let me give that a run and see what we have now. Add that tag, add another tag, click through. Maybe I'll add a tag from this part of the list way at the end, tag 19. Well, that's convenient for adding tags that already exist in the database. Not so convenient for letting us add our own textual tags and type in our own tags. If we typed ahead here, it would pretty much force us, oh look, error mode, it would force us to type in something that was in the list if we were going to call this add button. Which brings me to my next step, a little bit more complicated. So anybody have any questions on this so far before I take it to the next level? All right, next level we go. One thing I forgot to do is make this lookups label be tags. So we've seen some quick button actions and some of our new coach views. But let's do the next level here. We don't want to reset this because what we're going to do is allow you to type something into this lookup. And we added a new option for this. It's called validate entries. Right now, validate entries is by default. It makes you use an item in the list or else it doesn't set the value. Right now, we're going to set that to no. Setting it to no lets us type stuff in and bind that to the value of the lookup. So we're going to have a new tag name possible. And then when we click add, one of two things is going to happen. If there is an item selected in the list, we're going to add it to our repeater. If there is no item selected in the list, we're going to call a service and technically add that to our tag database just for ourselves to use for all of our screens. So we need to have two actions occur on this button, and we need to decide which action to do. So let me get that set up in our private variables. We're going to need a couple more things here. So right now, instead of calling the list action on tag click, we're going to call it a little bit differently. So we'll just have a variable for trigger list action. And then we'll trigger add tag for our new tag service. And then also, we're going to want tag name for our new tag. With that, we're going to bind tag name onto our lookup, and that will have our value of anything we type in on it. List action, we don't want to call it on click, we want to call it on the list action here. Trigger list action. List objects, that's going to stay on load. What we do need is something that takes in an object, or takes in a tag name, and then adds it to the database and returns the result, and probably triggers our list action and triggers a Boolean to set the list objects for the tags to come out. So we'll create a new coach view using our service call pattern, just to show that real quick. So our AJAX service call pattern helps you avoid using pesky boundary events for reusable views. Add a trigger. It'll automatically, if call the service when that's set to true, and automatically set that back to false when the service is done. What we do here is add a service. Default. We'll create a specific service for this one. Add new tag. We're not actually going to hook into the database here. I'm just doing this for a UI example, so we're just going to draw that to the end. Our input was going to be just a name for tag name. Our output, what we needed to do with the output is to trigger another action. We wanted to be able to trigger that we added a new tag. So I like to use something called, as my own personal pattern I invented myself, was to just return a variable that's set to true. So list action is triggered by the variable true. So if we just return something that sets a Boolean from false to true, we can trigger something else. And so I'll do that. All I need to do now is set that variable to true. This would be at the end of adding it to the database. So now I'll just be outputting a true variable. So if we take a closer look at our variables tab here and remember these, we had name as an input and is complete true as an output. So we need to match that up with our service call, coach view. So this add new tag, we had service here. We add execute on, very important for everything. So we can either trigger it when the variables change, trigger it on load, trigger it just on demand, gives us all those options. And then we had our inputs and output. Name was coming in, it was a string. I like to label them like this. And then coming out, we had is complete true, that was an output. Or I'll just do like this was a Boolean. So if we're lucky, we can just drag this into our coach and it'll fire this add new tag service, take in a name, and then push back out a Boolean true. So we can add this onto our coach. Add new tag is going to be fired by that add tag Boolean. Add new tag, we want this to be on demand. We don't need it to change when this name changes. We'll bind that to our tag name. And then because we want this to be added to our list, we're going to trigger the list action when this is complete. Well, that's all fun. This was bound to trigger add tag. Another thing we can do is if we want to make sure no one adds another tag while we're already adding our tag, is to bind the spinner, which will show a loading spinner that something's going on. I like to do this anytime I call a service using this pattern. I like to bind that Boolean to something else, to a show spinner, because it's automatically set to true and automatically set to false when it's done. So conveniently, just about all of our display coach views will have the show spinner on them. You can bind that Boolean there, get a little spinner. When your service is done, it'll go away automatically. Really convenient. So now our issue is we have this binding of add tag clicked, and we need to decide whether to fire the list action if it's a selection, or add new tag if it's a name. So you can think of a lot of ways to do this. You could fire a boundary event and do an if statement in there. You could use a couple of different calculates, which is one of our coach views that helps you manipulate data. You could even fire an AJAX service. What I'm going to show you is our client-side script coach view. I think it was added in 1.3. What this allows you to do is fire it whether it be on input change or on a particular action. So this is going to be just like a service call or any other action. You trigger it with a Boolean. We'll trigger it when we click that button. All we want to do is be able to figure out whether we want to set list action to true or add tag to true. And how are we going to figure that out? We're going to figure that out based on the selected tag. And if that selected tag is a full-on name value pair, we know we can fire the list action. Otherwise, we know we need to add the tag itself. This has options to trigger variables. We're not going to trigger it based on any of the variables changing. We're going to trigger it based on the Boolean, and we want to set it back to false so we can call it multiple times. And ask yourself, where can I put the code for this? The code for client-side scripts, as we found this was the easiest pattern to do it, is you drag in a custom HTML, and you can just write your variables right in here. You can reference them with var1 or var2 or var1, 2 through 7, or you can just reference them by name. So I believe we had a selected tag.name. Then we wanted to, that means we have a selected name value pair. We want to do trigger list action equals true. Else, we want to do trigger add tag equals true. And so if everything goes according to plan, and make sure we have our names right, trigger list action, trigger add tag, and selected tag. Selected tag, trigger list action, trigger add tag should all be set. It should fire this one, our service, to bring back a Boolean before we add it to the list action. So we might as well form a new name value pair when we get here too. Essentially, we would want to do, there's one more output for the service that I forgot to add, which is good to add here. We want to create that new tag. Which is a name value pair. The new tag has a name that's going to equal the name coming in, and the value would just be our ID, which is a GUID that will be generated from somewhere else. So we'll just do something like this. We're not going to display this, so we might as well create just a random number, tack it on to the name so we know we'll have something unique as we're adding our tag. So we're in the AJAX service, we have a new output, we need that to come back to our coach somehow. How are we going to do that? We get back to that add tag coach view, we'll click into that. We need to add a new output real quick. Let's do new tag out, make that a name value pair, call it an output just to make our UI clean. And then we'll bind that to selected tag. So now our list action, we should be able to take this selected tag, add it to the list. If we don't have any timing issues, that should work out just fine. So let's give this a shot. Hopefully I didn't miss anything here. Oh, see, we got this Boolean firing right off the bat. We didn't want that to be true. And we know we messed something up. Trigger add tag comes in as true. We didn't want that to be true. We check where we set that. And I think we just need to reinitialize this here, hopefully. Otherwise, it just means that something I dragged in got automatically bound to that Boolean, and that gives us some problems. Somehow we got something in there to start, and that's not what we want. So we can add tags the old-fashioned way. Let's open up Firebug to see that if we call that service or not. So I create a new tag. I should fire that service. We posted to the database and said, add a tag named new tag. It added it to the database, gave us back some data, and that data got plopped right into our page. It said, add this new tag, throw that new tag object into our repeater, and we'll be able to use that. And is complete set to true. It called our list action, and we're all fine and dandy. So one more thing I wanted to do before I say that's it for this demo is make this look much cooler and much better when you implement this onto a page. Right now, this will just be stuck in your page somewhere, not very pretty. We'd rather have that float on our page somewhere, and I saw a client do this the other day with a toolkit. I asked how to do that because that was pretty cool, and they said, oh, it's using the toolkit. And I'm like, really? You can do that? Well, that's the power even beyond my expectations. So what we can do is we drag our column into another row. We don't want to show the label at all. We'll get rid of that. But what we do want to do is rows have a position. You can stick them on the top of the page, or you can have them float on the bottom of the page. So we'll just throw that on the bottom of the page. We would need to add a couple different CSS tags on here to make it work conveniently. There's going to be some extra margin, and you can see got a little margin here, but we now have this on the bottom of the page. We can pop it up anytime we want to add some feedback. Sorry about whatever's going on with this initial object here. Add some tags. We lost our reset ability, so we'd have either our service reset that scope or just the add button after they're added to the database, reset the scope. Create, for the creation, we would want to do another service call. That service would take in content variable, and it would take in a list of my tags. We'd make a coach view for it, real simply, just as I interfaced to that AJAX service before. We'd do the same thing for that create button. It would create it. On return of that, it would tell us to close this and reset the form. Using coach views, wouldn't have to do too much else, avoiding boundary events. So I want to show what adding that to a coach might look like. This is something from another quick demo I did just the other week, about the same amount of time. So this one is a dashboard type coach. Well, that doesn't show up very well. What I'll do for a layout is just add an image there to my coach view so it doesn't look too obnoxious on my page. Import the label, yep. Show it on the right. Get back to my dashboard. Feedbacks here. This is kind of a dashboard where you can, if you're just viewing information, sometimes you want to be able to run a task right in the page. It allows you to do that with some complex stuff. So now we say, oh, cool, we've added our feedback button. But as you can see, we're kind of overlapping some things here. That's no good. We just add some real simple CSS on here. And we see that this isn't going to be functional and throw a lot of errors because one thing we forgot to do on this page was the necessary private variable pattern step of making sure that the objects within are all initialized, because IBM BPM does not initialize objects if you don't touch that variable. Now we pop it up. It works. This had one of those style we built applied into it, but that's not really pretty because it's taking over the screen. And what we do when that happens is jump onto our row. These would just be classes you'd add. I'm going to do them here rather than in CSS. Make that background transparent. So now we've got a pop-up that comes over our screen rather than being just covering it. And then we kind of want to get, just for the sake of this, I'd rather have it look pretty than not look pretty. You just add some CSS. Get rid of that bottom margin. So now we're floating on the bottom. We're able to add tags, do all that fun stuff. And this other demo is even cooler than this one because it lets you run tasks inside a table using our complex table and grid row sections. So that's a discussion for another day. Any questions on what I went over today with the what's new and with this build I just did for you? Well, if you don't have any questions, that's all I have prepared for the day. Hope you learned something about the toolkit and it will help you implement some fun features in ACV2 1.4. And as always, feel free to add tickets to Zendesk for any issues you find or new features you'd like to see, or just go ahead and email me, Kyle Hoskins. My information can be found on our website, apexbpm.com, or as well as apexcoachviews.com.
Apex Process Consultants. Don't try to catch up with your competition. Leave them behind.